Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be kicking off today's summit with our session, Friction to Fusion, Hacking Harmony Between Security and Developers. I'm your host, Julie Peterson. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at SciCode, and I am so excited to be joined by three incredible panelists. Please welcome Gilly Lev, a true cybersecurity heavyweight with more than 20 years experience steering enterprise-wide change within her security vision. Tanya Jenka, a leader and influential force in the industry. She is the founder of We Hack Purple, head of community at SemGrep, and best-selling author of Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. It's a great title. And then finally, we have James Berthotti, a cybersecurity trailblazer at PagerDuty and founder of Lashio Tech. He has a sharp and trusted view on what's really happening in the world of application security. Hi, Gilly, Tanya, and James. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so let's face it, the relationship between security and development teams can sometimes feel like a really intense game of tug of war, right? Security wants to make sure that we're getting our applications out free of defects, and developers are really focused on shipping features fast and making customers happy. Today, we're exploring this friction and would love to get our hot takes from our panelists on how to build trust and collaboration between these two critical teams. So let's just jump right on in. I'm going to start with you, Gilly, actually. So can you maybe describe or tell me what are some of the drivers that causes this friction and sometimes even chaos between security and dev teams?
Absolutely. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure being here with you. So, this is what I call the KPIs gap, right? Security and developer teams have very different interests, goals, and incentives. For developers, it's focusing on developing software, releasing features as quickly as possible for their customers to use. They're evaluated by their ability to move fast and focus on the product. Security, on the other hand, has opposing metrics. It's about limiting risks, tightening the security posture, and focusing on placing security guardrails and mitigating vulnerabilities while meeting regulatory and compliance requirements. These days, security teams also focus on new emerging threats and the ever changing attack vectors, while there's a digital and cloud transformation happening all around us and changes the way we operate and work. In addition to the KPIs gap, traditionally there has been a siloed way of working between security and dev and lack of communication. Another factor that contributes to it is insufficient training on security best practices can cause unintentional vulnerabilities introduced into the code, causing tension with the security teams and even blame if there's a security incident. One more I can think of is security teams have clear focus on meeting growing regulatory requirements, and that can potentially clash with developers striving for innovation and rapid deployment. So, yeah, overall, there's various factors that contribute to the friction between developer and security teams, rooted in differences in priorities, perspectives, and communication styles. But there's also many different ways that we can address those and create collaboration and alignment.
Okay,
May I
Tanya, do you
add
have
on
something
to
to
that?
add? Sure.
So I agree, but I also feel like a bit of it is experience and past experience so that we can feel empathy. And I don't mean empathy like, oh, I feel so sad for you, but just, oh, I know that the dev's going to have to do these four other things. And so they might not have time for all of the things I've asked. Maybe I should compromise and ask for just half of those things this sprint and the other half the next sprint because I've done sprints. And I find when I switched into security, I found a lot of my peers didn't understand the way that we worked or the things that we wanted. And it's not that they were heartless or anything like that, or they didn't care about other teams' priorities. It's just that they just didn't know those things because they didn't have that experience. And the more I learned about the security stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was such a jerk of a dev. Um, and so I feel like if we could walk in each other's shoes a bit more, we might be able to find places in the middle so much more often.
That's a, I have a great follow-up question for the point that you just made. And James, I'm going to throw this to you first. It really sounds like security and dev, right? They have different priorities. They're assessed differently in terms of what success is. They have different incentives. James, can you talk a little bit about that? And, maybe do we need to get some more alignment on goals?
Yeah, I think that earlier point really made me think about the how the different sizes of organizations exacerbates or shrinks that KPI gap. Because a lot of times when I've done DevSecOps at smaller to mid-sized companies, even PagerDuty in terms of number of employees is relatively small. We've been able to really have tightly woven together KPIs because it's expected that security is contributing the product and that product is valuing security, both because they have compliance requirements, but there's also a tightly knit strategy around security, right? So, like PagerDuty's FedRAMP and process, that's obviously been a major company driver for us as we've tied together those goals across all of engineering, of which security is a key part of that. But in larger organizations where, first of all, they've had a security team that's been separate for a longer amount of time, I think that KPI difference really starts to show itself where there's fundamentally totally detached goals where there's so many alerts coming in and there's such a the day-to-day job is so different when the teams start getting bigger and bigger that it really takes a conscious large scale process driven security champions type of approach to bring those goals back into an alignment. And that's more something I've been learning just again because my background's on the smaller company side where it's been relatively simple to drive alignment and really just have, I'm going, if before I ask a developer to do anything, I want to at least do it one time myself so that I know realistically what I'm asking them to do. And I'm not just dumping this theoretical amount of work on them because no one enjoys that experience, right? That's everyone's worst work experience when someone drives by and drops off a pile of work on your desk. So really it's about aligning those priorities exactly, and I just think that that's easier in smaller organizations than it is in bigger ones.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Gilly, I'm going to just kind of throw this over to you. James' point, right? We want to build these partnerships. So what are some of the do's? What are some of the don'ts in building these key partnerships between security and dev?
Question. So, first of all, building strong partnership between security and developer teams is essential for creating a secure and effective software development lifecycle, right, these days. And there's a few things that we can do to achieve that. I would say, and I heard some of those points already, fostering a collaborative culture, promoting effective communication, and integrating security into the development process are crucial. Security tooling integration will make developers feel empowered and engaged to participate in security. Also, encouraging cross training and shared goals will help alignment between security and developer teams. And I think security teams should contextualize security risks within the organization. A business case for security will help others truly understand why it's so important and critical to remediate. Last, I would say automate as much of the security process as possible to save time and achieve results with high accuracy. Fully integrated into your processes while you stay focused on speed and tight feedback loop. Now, a few things I would stay away from is creating a culture of blame for security incidents. That would be just counterproductive to collaboration and maybe even discourage teams from sharing and reporting issues. Right? Do not leave security until the end of the development process. That will just cost costly and time consuming security fixes. From my old experience, do not assume that developers fully understand security requirements without proper training. And last one, I would say do not overwhelm developers with critical and high findings without prioritizing them. I think prioritizing them is key to allow them to understand where to focus their efforts first. And I would also avoid unactionable alerts in order to provide guidance on remediation.
Great. Tanya, I see you nodding your head a lot. How do you drive that security agenda? How, following on the do's and don'ts, how do you drive that security agenda?
Okay, I have so many ideas. Like as Gilly was talking, I was like, oh, Oh, so many ideas. So I talk about this a lot. A security champions program can really help with this. So that's where basically you have one dev per team that is the champion of our cause, and you train them up, you give them a lot more inside information, a lot more support, you meet with them regularly, you have one-on-ones with them, you check in with them to see what they need, they report to you, you report to them, so you're sharing information constantly. I find programs like that can, if you put in the time and the heart, like you really need to actually communicate with them, and listen to their feedback and sometimes make adjustments, but their feedback's so valuable, right? So I find a program like that can really help us change the entire attitude of both sides, like both teams. On top of that, governance. So showing up at the project kickoff meeting and saying like, hi, I'm your resident AppSec nerd. I will be here to answer questions throughout this project. Like these are the things I'm expecting from you. So like Gilly was saying, giving them a list of requirements at the beginning and explaining to them or training them even how to do those requirements if you need to. But the requirements include like, we're going to do a threat model. And when you need your threat model, come call me and I'm going to arrange it for you. And so I feel like, so lots of agreeing here, but I feel like adding on like processes to support them the whole way through. So one more, the partnership model, which is a thing that Netflix, I guess, popularized, something I learned in the Canadian government where you have basically an AppSec person embedded in different projects. And we just make sure you get to the finish line in a secure manner. And so we just check in with them from time to time. It's like, hey, how's it going? Did you like get that thing? Did you do the stuff? Do you need a contractor? Like, what's up? How's it going? So there's lots of different ways we can do this, but it involves a lot of talking, a lot of spending time. Like we can't just assume it's going to work. When we do that, bad results. Yeah.
Okay, James, I have one for you now. Gilly had mentioned, the role of automation, right? We want to make things as easy as possible and as automated as possible. So, what role do various tools and platforms have in this process, in helping, particularly in helping to build trust with developers?
Yeah, it's that last part of the question makes it somewhat funny as far as I've always gone into tool assessments very starry-eyed because I'm extremely optimistic about like getting the vision of like we run in pipeline and the developer gets the results as soon as they're coding and everyone's going to be happy and troubleshoot things immediately and it sounds great and we get the implementation done. And then very quickly, no matter what security tool you do, you have to realize that on day one of everything working, you're going to get thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of findings to go and fix. Because the reality is, we take this vision of tool assignments and think like we're going to stop the bleeding in terms of like if I'm scanning every code request and I'm stopping vulnerabilities from getting in, then I'm doing something. But I think what's been missed with that approach is fundamentally that's not how vulnerabilities happen. Vulnerabilities happen because you're opening the basement and seeing all of this tech debt that is nightmarish, and that's where the actual findings are coming from. Most people are not pushing new vulnerable code on this like ongoing basis, right? Like if I'm coding something new, I'm picking the latest version of the library, and that version gets old and has vulnerabilities with it, and that's where the problems come in. And so it really comes down to when it comes to automating it, then really you have to be really realistic about, and I think that's why ASPM has become more of a thing, where the automation for shifting things left was not fundamentally about how soon can we get these alerts to developers when they're coding new things. It's about how can we create intelligible processes to fix and actually make the vulnerability chart go down instead of endlessly going up. And really, I think that's the key of the automation. I know I was very focused early on in application security product selection on getting the tool that was going to get the most findings in front of developers as fast as possible. But now I try to think more holistically about how am I going to get the right alerts in front of the right developers at the right time with the right information. And so the problem has become much more complex. But really, that's the opportunity for automation is like, how do I automatically find the asset owner, get the issue to them with the right information in it?
Yeah, and that's a great answer. Oh yeah, jump on in.
Okay, I love everything that James said. I was the same way when I started. I was like, I must find every single vulnerability. And it's like, then I realized one day we'll never have time to fix all of them. And so then I started looking at, can I find the vulnerabilities that actually really matter to our organization and reduce the risk overall to something where I sleep well at night? And I started ripping out tools and throwing old tools away and getting newer tools. And it's like, maybe I want a tool that's going to find fewer things, but everything it's find is like terrifying. Right. And maybe I'm going to find, 20 findings, but then I look at the context of those findings and I'm like, okay, so normally if I just looked at the CVE and they're all tens or whatever, I'm like, oh, that's quite bad. But when you look at the context, it's like, oh, well, this one's not actually exploitable. This one's behind the firewall. And then we have two other mitigating factors. And then it's like, actually, I just really need us to fix these 6 like right away. And then maybe these other 10 in the next sprint. And then maybe I don't care about the rest. Do you know what I mean? And it took me a long time to get to that state where it, and also to admit like this tool that I've played with for a long time, maybe it's not serving me the way I want. And sometimes that means you can just like, tune the tool, change the tool, add things to it, or combine it with another tool result and cross-reference. But sometimes I've just had to be like, I'm sorry, I think we need to throw this in the garbage and start again, which no client wants to hear. But I mean, in 6 months from then, they're usually pretty pleased with me.
In terms of paying down the tech debt, I mean, we've heard about, I've heard of companies who from day one, they ignore everything that's before it, right? So they ignore those thousands and thousands and thousands of overwhelming results that they're never going to get, rid of. And they start from day one and kind of focus on going, is that a decent strategy in terms of, working with your developers and not overwhelming them? Or is that, a foolish strategy? It's making Tanya sad. All right. Okay, well, let's move on. Gilly, I'm going to bring you back into the conversation here. How has Shift Left changed the way security and developers work together? Right? A lot of the things that we're talking about, James, is getting the right alert to the right developer at the right time. Right? That's kind of in that Shift Left mindset. Is it working? How are we doing there?
So, Shift Left has brought significant changes to the way security and developer teams work and collaborate together. And I want to mention that Shift Left is not only about moving security earlier in the timeline, it's about incorporating security requirements, conducting threat modeling, potentially implementing security tooling and analysis as early as the design and development phases. Now, this helps developers potentially proactively identify and mitigate vulnerabilities before they make it into the product, right? Early integration of security into the planning phase can help create collaboration between security and developer teams and really help them focus on helping each other with shared goals and achieve those.
Great. Tanya, you have something to add? You look really excited about this.
I know I talk about like pushing left and shifting security left so more often. So it just saves so much money, time, and headache. Like if you find a bug after something's in prod, you have to go all the way back and be like, where the heck was that in my code? You have to figure out how to compile that code again because like maybe you haven't opened it in 6 months and maybe the framework's been updated since then and you're like, oh man, I'm throwing my DLLs out. And then you fix it, then you have to convince someone from QA unless you have super perfectly automated tests, in which case I want to come work with you. Then you have to get permission to release and do all of those things. And before you know it, you've spent like $1,000 fixing this bug, where if you'd found it while you were coding, it would have taken 20 minutes. And also sometimes you just can't do as good of a job too. So like, I remember when I learned that and I was like, oh, why are we not doing this all the time? Like find every single thing early that we can. Then I saw this lady named Sasha Rodenbaum. So she's got her own podcast and all this stuff. But anyway, she did a chart where she took my chart of it costs this much to fix, in the coding phase versus QA versus if it gets out into prod. And then she did this illustration. She's like, this is if an attacker finds it. And then like the number just goes way off the screen of how much the security incident costs. And I'm like, way to make my chart look silly. Yeah, like we want to find it before the bad people do. Yeah. So shifting left
yeah,
helps us do
definitely.
that a lot.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think there's a big amount of details with shift left where it's the same as DevOps, where there's a good way and a bad way to do it. Where for a lot of companies, shift left means congratulations, developer. Like now you now have all of this extra stuff to fix. Um, and I think that's the bad version. And the same happened with DevOps, where monoliths were cut up in the microservices for no reason. Infrastructure was shifted to Kubernetes when it wasn't even the right fit for the specific application. And so it's the same sort of problems that happen. And that's like my solution to shift left is really thinking of security as just DevOps. Like you have the same interest of one of the best collaborations I've had in my career was getting into planning meetings with DevOps early. And sure, for 60% of those initial planning meetings with developers, we weren't needed because it was like we're going to change the color of a button or we're going to change the UI or the login, well, the login flow we would care. But a lot of the general things we didn't care about. But we both had the same interest of like, hey, we're going to stand up a new database. Oh, well, we both like both DevOps cares about creating and maintaining that database, and security cares about the security controls and the data types that are flowing in and out of it and how that's being controlled. And so there's a lot of shared interest there. And so I think really doing shift left well means that security and DevOps and dev are all working together, not just congratulations, now these alerts get fixed by someone else.
I just wanted to add to James' point, it's truly important to implement the shift left methodology right. If you implement it right, it can actually empower developers with security knowledge and help them take ownership on secure coding practices and truly understand the implications on their decisions on security. So it needs to be done right. Absolutely.
Great. Okay, we have time for one more super quick question. This time has flown by, so amazing that we're on our last question. But Tanya, I'm going to start with you. How do you work with engineering management and C-level to influence security? And should we be starting at the top and moving down? Is that important?
I think it depends on where you work, which I realize is the cop-out answer. So if you work somewhere and you already know upper management is on board, that's not where you want to start, right? You want to get right to the boots on the ground. If you already have support from the top, you know that they're interested, there's already governance steps, there's all those things when you show up. First of all, that's great. Like when I showed up at Microsoft, that's how it was. I remember explaining to someone, they had this problem and I was like, and here's the reasons we need to fix it. They're like, oh, you don't need to explain that. We're going to fix it. Of course. And I was just like, whoa. So then you start on just like you go in and you fix the things. But if you know you don't have support from upper management, or you know that they say you have support, but then their actions do not reflect their words, then you need to start at the top. And I usually try to explain to them what the business risk is in their words rather than cyber words. And exactly how it can affect our customers, our citizens, our employees, or whatever the thing is that's the bottom line that they care about. So using language that they use rather than language I would use in a meeting with like James or Gilly. Anyone else?
James Gilly, anything to add?
Yeah,
I want to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it really does depend on the business. I've been places where developers are very bought in and places where they have to be forced, places where upper management's been bought in or not. And really, the only thing I'd have to say is be careful if you start at the bottom, because that's typically what I've done. But you can accidentally create this sort of like rebellious overthrow that's going to happen, and like you're like turning employees against their own management and stuff, and it like can go badly. So it's just important to be cognizant of creating alignment across the org and being realistic with your priorities. Are we trying to fix every vulnerability? Is a 30-day remediation for critical like what we actually want to do? And trying to make that business case, I think, is important, or else you risk creating strife within other organizations even.
I totally agree. To second James' point, It is a bottom up and top down approach that needs to create alignment with all levels. With C-level executives, I would say it's not only with the CISO, it has to have um, other executives alignment and buy-in into your security initiatives, building a solid business case, making sure that they all understand what you're trying to achieve.
Great.
Thumbs out.
Perfect way to end. Perfect way to end this session. We are at time. Thank you so much, Gilly, Tanya, and James. It has been a pleasure to have you here. Really exciting conversation today. Thank you to the audience for joining us as well. Really appreciated all of these insights. I am finally handing it back over to Shauna, who will be moving us on to the next session. So please, everyone, stay tuned, and thank you so much.